Welcome to Community Cocktails with Kimberly, hosted by Kimberly Woodard, a realtor who's been selling homes in North Texas with more than 21 years of experience. Join her every first and third Wednesday of the month as she meets with top community leaders, local businesses, and real estate industry experts to help you get to know the area you want to call home. Don't just love your home, love your community. And now your host, Kimberly Woodard.
Welcome, viewers, to this episode of Community Cocktails with Kimberly. So I have such a great podcast to share with you today. I have a wonderful guest. Right now we are home. Our kids are out of school. Maybe you have those kids that came home from college, and so the house is a little bit different on dynamics. Well, I've got Bridget Jowid here. She is a licensed counselor as well as a marriage and family therapist. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, let's talk. You're in the same, you've got kids that around the same age as mine.
I do, yeah.
And school's out and everyone's home and the household is definitely a different dynamic.
It is. And as parents, we're not given our manual on how to parent. And so you have to learn how to kind of parent and adapt your parenting as your child goes through many developmental milestones, right?
Definitely.
From early childhood to preteen to the teenage adolescent years.
Oh, yes.
And then college. And we continue to develop until we die. So
I feel like, yes. I mean, my mom will say, yes, I'm still parenting.
We need a chapter book that we have to read before we should have children.
Oh, we should.
On how to parent.
I know.
I'm not writing it. I'm not writing it. I'm sure there's a lot of people that have written stuff. So
yes, but I mean, of course, it's always different with each child too. Each child you have to do different things with, and you have to adopt different ways. I mean, I know in my household, I've got one is one way and one is the other.
Yeah, you're right. And there is some recommended consistencies on how to parent that will support the differences in your child's temperament.
Well, let's talk about, kids, they get to that adolescent age where they don't open up. And it's, they walk in, you're like, how's your day? Fine. Did you see anyone? Yeah. I mean, you can't get them to elaborate on to, oh, I saw Billy.
Yeah.
And we did this.
It can be uncomfortable, frustrating for the parent.
Yes.
And maybe for the child too.
Right.
Yeah, I think that, so there's there's three aspects to that. There's multiple aspects to look at that, as if you have a camera and kind of looking at how might the parent approach that? What is the child maybe going through? And then there's this space between them that is worth exploring and looking at as well. And so it's like what contributes to the behavior of your child, and then what's contributing to the concern and behavior of the parent. And so we can look at those if you want. We can talk more about that.
Oh, yes, because I think especially in our crazy, I don't even know what to say, world that we had, I think parents are even more wanting to, be more aware of what's going on with their children. You see every time we turn on the news, there's some kind of, crazy news story. And, I know every parent is thinking, oh gosh, that could be, what if that was my child, my situation. And so I think the lines of communication between, trying to keep those lines of communication
are so important.
Yeah.
So I can talk about, how to really set your family up for that success as they get older, or we can talk about what do you do now that you did the best you could, and here we are. Well, where do you want to start?
Let's start with how we can set the family up, and then kind of elaborate it to.
So early attachment style is so critical for communication later in life, and for just relationships in general. And so there's been some studies done by some of the attachment theorists in our profession, clinical psychologist Dr. Daniel Brown from Harvard, brilliant man, and he wrote a book called Attachment Disturbances in Adults, but he also just studied attachment style. And he teaches us that by the time a child is 18 months old, the mapping for attachment style is laid down in their brain.
Wow.
By the time they are 4, the ones that have better grades than me, can predict how a child will attach in their adult years. So attachment style, which includes communication, is really foundational. It's passed on generationally. So our primary caregivers will teach us those patterns of communication. What's really cool about that, though, is we want to pay attention with how we're parenting. And I just want to kind of let everyone know, there has been some studies done where 70% of the cues that our children give us are missed by parents. 70%.
Wow. That's
Yeah, so it's huge. So being attuned to your child early and attuned to yourself is important. But it's not so much how we miss. It's really about how we can repair and how we can do the best we can with what we're given, right?
Right. Definitely.
But they do give us some guidelines. You want your child to, one, be able to explore and feel safe to explore.
Yeah.
Right. And then you want your child to be able to come back and feel that they are going to be comforted when they come back.
Right.
And then you're going to want to be a strong but kind parent.
Right.
And I think those 3 aspects of being able to be kind and strong and find delight in your child, being able to allow your child to understand what it feels like to have freedom and explore, but then also security of being able to come back and know that when they come back to you, that you're able to greet them with comfort and love. And those 3 aspects from early childhood will follow them all the way into adolescent years.
Wow.
Right?
Wow. That's remarkable. I mean, I wouldn't think that, the patterns were formed that early.
Very early. Yeah.
Wow.
For attachment theories.
Yeah.
But yeah, now they're not set in stone. You can change them,
Right.
coming to counseling, self-exploration.
Yes.
You can change patterns of attachment.
Wow. Like I said, I hope I did some stuff wrong.
Well, and again, even though those are pretty steep, Sue Johnson, who is a well-known marriage and family therapist, she created emotion-focused therapy. She quotes that a lot.
Okay.
I have also heard it through, it's called the Circle of Security Parenting.
Oh, okay.
And it kind of gives a circle or a cycle of how to really just be a parent that supports that exploration, but then receiving the child with comfort and love and safety, but then also being a strong parent that's kind and on kind.
Right.
And then also, so much of our parenting, we get triggered into regression.
Yeah.
To where we start, thinking it's maybe about us, or our child triggers our own stuff, maybe a sense of I don't have control or something to that extent. Whereas sometimes it's learning how to let your child just explore, and it's their journey in so many ways.
So you're talking about the helicopter parent?
Well, yeah, you said it. Yeah,
and really letting them explore. Yeah, I mean, I think I've always been the parent in our house that I told my kids from the very beginning, I'm not going to school. I've already done that. I've already been. So you are. So it's up to you. You want to make good grades, and you know what you need to do. I'm not going to harp on you. You got to do this or you got to do that. Now I will say my one's he's always like, I got it, Mom, no worries. My youngest is overachiever. Like, he's probably the only one that actually goes in and checks like where he is and ranking stats with school. My oldest never did. He's just like, fine.
Well, good for you. So it sounds like you were a steady, consistent support to your kids, but then you also gave them a sense of, you've got this, you can do it.
Right.
And so you've given them the permission to explore and to experience some freedom, but then also to come back to you with knowing that you would be safe, secure, supportive, but then also a guiding, kind strength, right?
Yes.
Which sometimes we need to be, because the brain development of an adult is very different than the brain that's developing throughout the years of the single digits all the way to teenage years. And let's not lose sight of the beautiful teenage years where people have, and they roll their eyes when they go, the teenage years. But adolescence is such a beautiful time of development and innovation. And Dan Siegel wrote a great book called Brainstorm. I highly recommend that for all parents to read, and for adolescents. I think he wrote it appropriate for adolescents as well. But adolescence is a developmental milestone. It's not just the teenage years. It includes the teenage years. And it starts from age 12 and it goes to 25, 26 years old.
Okay.
And in that phase is this beautiful development of the brain, where the brain is pruning itself. And really those skills that teenagers use, they will keep and they will strengthen. And they also have neurotransmitter fluctuations with dopamine. A time you had mentioned before we started filming about social media.
Yes.
It is also a time where adolescents are, susceptible to addictive type behavior because of those dopamine fluctuations. But just a great developmental milestone. Wow. And the brain is doing something different than what it's doing as an adult. As an adult, we're working from, the prefrontal cortex, whereas an adolescent's primary area is their limbic system. The motion centers of their brain is guiding a lot of the kiddos at that time.
Wow. And going to the social media, I think that's been obviously a big thing. We hear that. I mean, kids are on it. I mean, kids as young as, single digits are on it. And it's a different dynamics. I mean, every day I'm like, thank goodness it wasn't there when I was growing up. But I think there's a lot of challenges with it.
Yeah.
I think you've got, my kids growing up were never a big social media, person. I mean, they had accounts, but they never posted. I mean, I think my oldest got locked out of his account until he was about a senior. He had an account, but he couldn't figure out his password. He couldn't get reset. It wasn't a big thing for him. My youngest is on it, but he'll look at stuff, and he's usually following his favorite chefs and stuff like that on it. But there are parents out there where their kids are on it. To a very, especially now with the summer, is consistent on it. And how do you I mean, I hate to say monitor, but how do you keep your kids not obsessed with it? I think
you could have a podcast just for that. Yeah, and if we did that, we'd probably need to bring in the counselors that focus mostly on that. I think there are pros and cons to social media. The pros are it's this beautiful connection,
right?
And we do connect very quickly,
right?
But I think the cons are that it does. We are missing some of the other aspects of the human connection, which words, especially if we're dealing with texting, maybe not in the same regards to Snapchat. And we're not even talking about, the influences of, all the other social media forms. But there is a connection aspect that's wonderful and quick. But the other aspect that might be a little bit negative is that there could be an addictive part of that, which is the dopamine fluctuations of the brain and the immediacy. And some kids will, not some, I mean, for all of us, 7% of our communication is words.
Yeah.
The other 93% is body language and tone. Mm-hmm. And so, when you're texting, you're going to miss a tremendous amount of communication opportunities. And for adolescents, there is that emotion. I told you they're kind of functioning from that emotion aspect. Well, that emotionality and being able to interact with other humans is really forming the frontal lobe, and as Dan Siegel teaches us that. Yeah. So there's just I think moderation is really the key. And I think
a lot of things.
And I think for adolescents and parenting, I think the important thing is to implement that earlier than later. Like, don't try to all of a sudden, I mean, of course, intervention at any point is important.
Right.
But if you potentially have waited too long if you decide to put limits on your senior with social media.
Right.
Consider implementing that sooner than later so that it's just understood as the culture of your family. of, when you need to put the phones down so that you can have some alone time by yourself.
Right.
A certain hour on,
No, I love that. Yeah.
I hope that's helpful.
I think that's very helpful because, especially, parents out there that have youngers, starting, the presidents now, so then it's just adopted. It's just how it is. It's the way it is. Versus then taking something away, because then you're kind of contradicting about the lines of communication with them, because then they're not waiting to come back, and you're, and you've kind of you've tried to take away something that you've always had another way.
It's just part of
how it was.
Yeah, so then you'll run into some challenges with that, as opposed to catching it early. And then also, as a parent, limiting it yourself, modeling that for your child as well.
Oh, yeah.
But their dopamine fluctuations as an adolescent will be different. I do want to go back to your earlier question, though, is like, how do you handle that, adolescent who doesn't give you those full answers that maybe a parent would want? And so we kind of touched on, early attachment style when you're young.
Right.
And when you're older, it's kind of similar in that you just, as a parent, want to transition into recognizing that your child is so much of that foundation you've already set for that child in regards to communication with you. So one first thing would be to maybe look at yourself as a parent and think to yourself, who am I being, and who have I been? And is my space safe? And do I really allow them to speak? Right? Or do I anticipate in an anxious way a response from them? Right? So that's just kind of maybe a check-in within ourselves. And then another thing would be, if it really is a concern of the parent, then to look at the child and realize, all behavior is based out of an internal and an external experience. So if you see a behavior in your child and you're like, he used to talk a lot, now he's not talking much, I'm kind of concerned, he's not sharing with me, you might, as a parent, want to chase the why. The child will not necessarily know the why. You might want to think of the why. Like, for example, this morning, my son comes down and I was like, good morning. And, not much from him.
Right.
I thought, how appropriate, as I am going to come to talk with you. But he was tired, running late, not the right time.
Yep.
Independent, very independent minded. And so it's more of, do I need to check in and not be too anxious and wanting a desired response from him, as opposed to meeting him where he is? Yeah. So some of it's, is it the right time? Right. And asking if it's the right time if you need it. You're clearly tired, running out the door, running late. Is it the right time to be like...
Right. And trying to get them to talk and have a whole 30-minute conversation with you, because they're like, Mom, I gotta go. Yes. And then they get anxious, and everything. I know that's one thing with my oldest, he's home now. So, I know on Tuesdays, I'm like, he's waking up and it's like 9:30. My youngest is rolling back home. He's like, I've already had half my day. You're just getting up. And so, and so it's like a different, just a different dynamics. Yes. But, they're all talking. Or my youngest, if he's getting out the door, he don't want to talk in the morning. He's got to get ready, eat, and out the door. So he's somewhere by 7 a.m.
Yeah. Now, if it's at the dinner table, it's a little bit different. It's kind of as if somebody were to go to you and say, Kimberly, how was your day? What did you do today? Yeah. You might be like, oh, wow. You're like, a whole world opens up in your head and your mind, and you go, where do I start? Right. So that's some of it as well as temperament, of the child. So is it the right time? Take into account the temperament of the child. Is he an internalizer or an externalizer? And if it's a real concern, then chase the why in regards to, what has he been exposed to? Has things changed? Right. And listen to your gut as a parent as well. Really, there are receptors around
definitely.
In your gut area and your heart.
It's parents' intuition.
Yeah.
You feel something is not right, there probably isn't.
That's right. That's right.
Well, this has been such a pleasure. I hope, viewers, you have taken some tips, and we'll have some sources out here as well for you to, get on, and whether books or online sites. And it was so much fun, Bridget. So cheers to us. Cheers to happy parenting.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple and Spotify, as well as Kimberly's YouTube channel. If you'd like to contact Kimberly directly, you can email her at kimberlywoodard@ebby.com or call 214-632-2092. We hope you enjoyed our guest this week. And remember, don't just love your home, love your community.